when climate turns against you. Africa faces another constraint that cannot be negotiated away. Changing climate patterns are directly reshaping daily life and undermining economic progress. The paradox here is stark. The continent produces the smallest share of global greenhouse gases, yet feels some of the sharpest consequences. According to the World Meteorological Organization, average surface temperatures in Africa during 2024 were about 0.86 degrees Celsius above the 1991 to 2020 mean, and the frequency of climate shocks has already displaced roughly 700,000 people in just 1 year. Unlike wealthier parts of the world, Africa does not have deep reserves of infrastructure or finance to soften these blows. That imbalance makes environmental disruption an economic concern as much as an ecological one. Across much of the continent, farming and pastoral activity remain the backbone of employment. Subsistence plots feed families, commercial crops provide foreign exchange, and herding supports entire communities. This dependence on rainfall and soil means that climate disruptions translate almost instantly into lost income and food shortages. When rains fail, maize fields wither. When floods arrive, stored grain and bridges are swept away. For pastoralists, erratic rain leaves grazing land barren, triggering longer seasonal migrations and conflicts over scarce pasture. Each swing in weather chips away at systems households have relied on for generations, compounding instability. The droughts of 2024 highlight the cost vividly. Southern Africa experienced its worst harvests in years. Zambia's cereal production fell 43% below its 5-year average, while Zimbabwe's dropped by nearly 50%. The immediate effect was a sharp food supply shortfall. That triggered a chain reaction that economists describe as drought, harvest shortfall, price spikes, food insecurity, political unrest. This simple chain is repeated across multiple regions, with local variations, making climate volatility one of the most consistent threats to social stability. Desertification deepens these vulnerabilities over longer horizons. Once productive land gradually loses output as soils degrade under pressure from overuse and longer dry spells. At first, yields just dip slightly and families adapt, but over time the decline forces young workers out of farming altogether. Many move to already crowded cities where jobs are scarce. This migration increases unemployment, fuels informal settlements, and strains urban infrastructure, turning what began as soil erosion into a broader social challenge. At the opposite extreme, floods now strike with increasing intensity. In West Africa and Indian Ocean states, heavy rainfall has repeatedly overwhelmed drainage systems and inundated towns. The economic losses include washed-out roads, ruined crops, and destroyed storage facilities. Infertile or saline soils left behind make recovery even harder. Weak infrastructure magnifies the damage. A storm can erase investments not just in farms, but also in transport links, leaving communities cut off from markets for months. Each year of flooding compounds the financial fragility of families and governments already operating on the edge. Even countries with resource wealth are not spared. Export economies dependent on oil or mining face parallel shocks when hydroelectric dams run dry from weak rainfall or when agricultural zones collapse during drought. In some nations, energy shortages have forced industries offline for days at a time. Those interruptions undermine investor confidence and cut into national revenue streams. A state that looks strong on paper with large mineral reserves quickly finds its fiscal position weaker when climate variability cuts power or reduces food security simultaneously. Food insecurity has become a consistent output of these changing conditions. Economies that once produced enough staples are often pushed into importing large quantities of grain. These imports tie local stability to global markets, where price spikes from conflicts or supply disruptions elsewhere quickly ripple into African cities. When a loaf of bread suddenly costs twice as much, the shock destabilizes households who already spend most of their income on food. Political demonstrations often follow, turning climate stress into governance pressure. The impact spreads beyond farming alone. Financial institutions hesitate to extend loans for rural projects when a single failed season can wipe out repayment ability. Insurance companies either avoid offering coverage or raise prices to unaffordable levels. Investors shy away from putting money into long-term infrastructure in flood-prone regions. The result is that those who have the skills and ambition to grow businesses encounter an invisible wall erected by climate unpredictability. opportunities remain theoretical rather than realized. Migration becomes the coping strategy for many. Families leave farms no longer able to produce enough. Some migrate internally, swelling cities already short on jobs and services. Others cross borders, contributing to regional migration pressures. The consequence is not just a change in where people live, but in the demographics of whole nations. Informal settlements expand, stresses on urban governance multiply, and competition for scarce employment intensifies. Climate migration is thus tied directly to national stability, rather than just being a humanitarian question. Communities are not passive in the face of these threats. Farmers continue to adapt where they can by switching planting dates, experimenting with drought-resistant seed varieties, or investing in basic irrigation. Pastoralists adjust grazing routes to sustain herds longer. But without coordinated national support, even determined efforts falter. Infrastructure to store grain, irrigation channels to stabilize yields, or resilient roads to withstand floods require investment well beyond the capacity of smallholders. Experts emphasize that scaling early warning systems, digital tools, and climate-smart investments is essential. Yet funding and governance gaps prevent those strategies from moving at the scale required. Coastal populations confront added risks as sea levels creep upward. Small rises in water height bring saltwater intrusion, degrading farmland and contaminating drinking water. Fishing communities lose breeding habitats, reducing catches and threatening food supplies. Unlike wealthy nations that can invest billions in seawalls or relocation programs, most African states face limits too severe to implement such measures. This structural inequality leaves large populations in precarious positions, vulnerable to events largely outside their control. The broader development pattern is uneven and unstable. A country may record several years of strong GDP growth, build key roads, or even attract foreign investment, only to see those gains undone when a prolonged drought forces emergency food imports. Governments redirect funds from long-term needs like education or healthcare into crisis relief. The pattern resembles a staircase where each upward step is followed by a sharp drop, erasing momentum and pushing timelines for progress further into the future. While climate threats are not technically insurmountable, they demand resources and coordination on a scale few African economies currently possess. Wealthier nations have the capital to recover from major storms or fund massive adaptation projects. For most African governments, each crisis exhausts reserves and forces ever more dependence on external aid. The gap between the pace of environmental change and the capacity to adapt widens almost every year, reducing resilience even where leadership is committed to solutions. By 2025, climate variability has become one of the most concrete barriers to African development. Droughts erase harvests, floods sweep away infrastructure, and rising seas undermine coastal livelihoods. These forces create repeated setbacks for economies that already struggle with fragile institutions and governance dilemmas. The continent's smallest contribution to emissions stands in stark contrast to the scale of its exposure. Ordinary households bear the brunt of shocks they did little to cause, finding their plans overturned again and again. The deeper challenge is that climate shocks don't arrive in isolation. They combine with other financial and institutional weaknesses, straining governments already operating under severe fiscal pressure. And when environmental disruption meets fragile state budgets, the question shifts from how to adapt to how to pay, a shift that directs attention to one of the heaviest burdens African nations now carry: debt and the new global players. Why do so many African governments see more money flowing outward than inward, even in years of strong resource exports? The explanation lies less in trade than in finance, specifically debt. Over decades, uneven growth and heavy borrowing from external lenders have built obligations that consume large pieces of public revenue each year. Instead of fueling new investments, a significant share of income now leaves the continent in the form of repayments. The outcome is an economy that appears in motion but makes little forward progress. Infrastructure explains much of this dynamic. Big-ticket projects, ports, highways, power plants, and rail networks require capital far beyond what tax bases can cover. External loans step in, often faster than domestic financing could, but the terms tie governments to repayment schedules stretching years into the future. In practice, interest costs pile up while projects take time to show benefits. Some loans require that funds be spent on contractors from the creditor country itself, limiting local job creation. At the outset, these deals seem to promise modernization. Later, they weigh heavily on budgets already stretched thin. One of the most important players has been China, especially through the Belt and Road Initiative. Since its launch in 2013, BRI projects worldwide have involved more than $1.3 trillion in cumulative engagement. Across Africa, this produced visible results: new railways in East Africa, port facilities, and energy infrastructure. For many governments, such finance offered a lifeline when traditional lenders were less forthcoming. Yet the deals were not uniform. Some projects delivered important growth opportunities, while others faltered or underperformed, leaving the debt on the books without the revenue streams expected to cover it. BRI projects often provide quick infrastructure financing, but sometimes tie contracts to Chinese firms and complicate debt restructuring. This nuance is clear from recent renegotiations. Treating these loans can feel like paying only the minimum on a credit card. Governments send regular payments to keep relationships afloat, but the principal remains large, and the weight does not ease. Debt service now occupies a central position in budgets, narrowing choices for everything else. For education, that can mean classrooms without funds to hire additional teachers. For health, it can mean shortfalls in vaccine supplies. For road networks, it can mean deteriorating surfaces that undercut the very infrastructure once hailed as a success. For a young adult looking at public finances in 2025, this translates directly into fewer jobs created, reduced education budgets, and limited support for new businesses. Debt also shapes how leaders plan, or fail to plan, for the long term. With so much revenue already committed, governments hesitate to fund costly, slow-return projects like national irrigation systems or new public health systems. Instead, they pivot toward short-term measures that can be managed within constrained budgets. While this may keep finances stable in the present, it delays the structural projects most capable of lifting economies over decades. That imbalance shows why heavy debt creates not only an economic burden, but also a political one. The influence of creditors further complicates sovereignty. International bond markets adjust borrowing costs based on rating agencies' views of risk. Lower ratings often mean double-digit interest rates, which in turn force states to set aside even more revenue for interest. Countries such as Zambia, Chad, Ethiopia, and Ghana have all had to restructure their debts under the G20 Common Framework. These episodes illustrate that unsustainable obligations are not abstract. They are very present, and they carry high social and economic costs. Each restructuring highlights that repayment terms, not just original loan conditions, shape the space governments have to manage their economies. China's role here is mixed rather than one-dimensional. Some loans have been criticized for tying repayment to strategic assets and for favoring Chinese contractors. Others have supplied critical infrastructure that might not exist otherwise. In restructuring talks, this nuance appears again. Flexibility is sometimes granted, but repayment obligations remain non-negotiable. Balancing short-term access to capital with long-term debt sustainability has become one of the most pressing financial challenges across the continent. Many African governments continue to seek financing from Beijing, acknowledging both the opportunities and the risks. For citizens, the costs are less theoretical. A delay in agricultural investment may stretch food insecurity longer than expected. A cut to health spending leaves clinics short on supplies. Families paying rising school fees experience the knock-on effects of budgets reoriented toward creditors. From the outside, these may look unrelated, but collectively they represent the invisible opportunity costs of external borrowing. Debt doesn't just remove money from countries, it removes chances for families to escape poverty. There is also a psychological layer. The repeated necessity of new borrowing to cover old loans normalizes dependence. Citizens see promises of transformation tied to finance agreements, yet experience little visible change in daily conditions. This cycle generates skepticism about whether borrowing is for genuine development or elite networks aligned with global lenders. Confidence in government capacity erodes, shaping how people view both leaders and external partners. That said, there are experiments showing paths forward. Some governments are pursuing debt-for-nature swaps, agreeing to redirect obligations toward climate preservation efforts in exchange for relief. Others seek to negotiate new terms through multilateral channels, stretching repayment horizons to allow domestic budgets some breathing room. Regional institutions have also begun offering modest alternatives, although not at the scale needed to offset global financing demands. These approaches show creativity, but underline that reversing debt accumulation is a long journey. By 2025, debt remains one of the most significant constraints on African growth. Servicing obligations consumes billions that might expand schools, fund hospitals, or fuel entrepreneurial startup programs. Where loans provided infrastructure, the results often came at the cost of long-term fiscal space. The contradiction is clear. Borrowing aimed at development often ends by limiting future development capacity. The weight is not evenly distributed, but its presence is felt widely across the continent. This financial reality also intersects with another persistent challenge. Heavy debt loads restrict public sectors from creating opportunities that match the ambitions of their younger citizens. For many skilled workers, the absence of reliable prospects encourages them to seek opportunities elsewhere. That outward flow of talent has become one of the continent's most pressing economic dilemmas, compounding the very strains debt creates internally. The brain drain problem. Another major barrier lies in the flight of skilled people, often described as Africa's brain drain problem. Doctors, engineers, and scientists trained on the continent frequently choose to continue their careers abroad. The choice is less about personal loyalty and more about practical conditions. Abroad, they find higher pay, modern equipment, reliable infrastructure, and predictable career paths. At home, wages remain low, facilities are underfunded, and political or economic instability makes long-term planning difficult. Taken together, these push and pull factors make leaving less of an emotional decision and more of a rational calculation. African governments are not indifferent to this pattern, and many invest heavily in education, hoping to build a workforce strong enough to meet national development needs. Universities churn out medical, engineering, and science graduates while governments expand technical and vocational programs. The expectation is that this talent will reinforce health systems, modernize industries, and drive innovation. Yet just as graduates reach the point where their expertise could make a domestic impact, many depart. As a result, societies fund years of training only to see the benefits accrue elsewhere. The loss is twofold. Local institutions are deprived of competent professionals, and the original investment in education does not yield returns at home. The scale is most visible in healthcare. Training a doctor is one of the most expensive and time-consuming public investments a country can make. But when trained doctors migrate, home health systems face shortages that directly affect life and death outcomes. In rural regions, facilities often operate with just a handful of nurses or without any qualified doctor at all. Patients must travel long distances, wait hours for attention, or go untreated. Behind every departure is not only a professional seeking better tools, but also communities left more vulnerable. The same applies to nurses and specialists whose absence limits hospitals' capacity to respond to crises or expand services. Information technology and engineering provide another stark example. Graduates in these fields, often educated with up-to-date skills, find limited opportunities at home. Domestic firms may be small, under-resourced, or constrained by weak infrastructure. In contrast, companies abroad offer fast-growing tech environments, competitive pay, and structured career ladders. The result is that some of the very people best equipped to bridge Africa's digital divide are instead building systems elsewhere. For energy and manufacturing, where talent is scarce and technological adoption is critical, the result is stalled projects and slower adoption of efficiency-enhancing innovations. This steady outward flow creates a cycle hard to break. Workplaces weaken when professionals leave, making conditions worse for those who remain. That deterioration encourages further departures. Over time, institutions lack not just numbers, but the critical core of experienced professionals able to train, lead, and innovate. Without that layer of mentorship and applied skill, development programs face constant setbacks. It becomes not just a shortage of personnel, but a shortage of possibilities, where potential projects never move past plans because capacity is too thin. The paradox is that migration drains skills but also re-injects some benefits through connections abroad. Modern communications and financial systems mean Africans overseas rarely sever ties completely. Remittances flow back at scale, strengthening household budgets and local economies. The GSMA reported that remittances sent to sub-Saharan Africa reached roughly $29 billion in 2023, much of it enabled through mobile money and digital transfers. These funds often cover school fees, medical care, housing, or seed money for family businesses. The same doctor who left Lagos for work in New York may send money that educates younger relatives or sustains community initiatives. In this way, migration both subtracts and supplements development. Beyond money, diaspora communities contribute knowledge and opportunities. They establish research partnerships, secure places for students in foreign institutions, and link domestic startups with international markets. A software engineer working in London may connect firms in Nairobi to investors, while a scientist based in Toronto can collaborate virtually with colleagues back in Accra. Technology has reduced the distance between those abroad and those at home, making ongoing participation feasible even after migration. These ties complicate the notion of permanent loss, as talent outside borders can still play active roles in national development. However, relying too heavily on diaspora networks creates its own vulnerabilities. Global crises can suddenly cut remittance flows or make cross-border collaboration more difficult. For example, when global recessions hit, migrants abroad may tighten personal budgets, meaning less money sent home. Dependence on external connections thus exposes households and governments to risks beyond their control. The returns, though valuable, seldom replace the irreplaceable impact of having skilled professionals physically embedded in local institutions. The deeper concern is generational perception. When young people repeatedly see their role models leave, success becomes associated with departure. Staying behind comes to look like compromising ambitions. This cultural expectation perpetuates the cycle. Students plan their education as a route abroad rather than as a basis for careers at home. Over decades, the psychological signal may be as damaging as the numbers lost, reinforcing the idea that the continent's most talented must look outward to thrive. In response, governments experiment with several strategies. Some increase salaries and improve working conditions for critical professions like doctors and teachers. Others create business incubators or research centers designed to provide domestic opportunities more closely aligned with international standards. A few implement incentive schemes, housing support, guaranteed posts, tax breaks for professionals willing to return. Results have been mixed. Some individuals do come back, motivated by family ties or patriotic drive, but the scale rarely reverses broader flows. Structural weaknesses in financing, governance, or infrastructure often overshadow the benefits of targeted policies. A lower-cost option gaining traction is to leverage diaspora contributions without requiring physical return. Governments and think tanks stress the possibility of structured diaspora engagement. This can involve inviting professionals to deliver remote guest lectures, participate in short-term consultancies, or invest in pooled funds for startups back home. Brookings and other policy centers note that diaspora-led investment, skills transfer, and collaboration models are already underway in various sectors. By formalizing channels for such initiatives, governments can tap into global expertise and financing without requiring permanent relocation. Technology makes this far more feasible than in past decades, and the challenge is often less about possibility than about creating the right organizational frameworks. Despite growing recognition of these opportunities, brain drain still imposes heavy costs. Limited workforces undermine sectors that need steady expansion to keep pace with population growth. Health services, infrastructure programs, and tech ecosystems move slower because core teams remain thin. At the same time, the reliance on remittances, while essential for many families, cannot substitute for robust, self-sufficient local systems. The push to frame migration as an asset through diaspora engagement is promising, but it requires careful design to ensure benefits reach beyond individual households and strengthen institutions directly. By 2025, the problem remains unsolved. Africa continues to educate skilled talent that often departs, redistributing benefits unevenly between home and host countries. Families and small communities benefit from remittance flows, while national development suffers from a shortage of the very professionals needed to improve systems at scale. The continent faces a mixed reality where talent both leaves and contributes, but rarely in balances that transform underlying weaknesses. Until working conditions at home approach the opportunities offered abroad, this tension will persist. Yet within this challenge lies another possibility. The same networks and technologies that keep migrants connected to their families also open unexpected paths for economic transformation. What feels like a limitation may also provide tools for building new systems of growth that operate differently from the traditional models.